This episode may contain content of a graphic nature. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Mariah. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Body to Burial. Okay. How's it going over there?
It's going.
Maybe I can make the day a little better. I think, you and I have been trying to get this particular guest for a while now. So I'm really excited that we finally have her on. And we are happy to present to all you listeners, little drum roll, if you will, Julie, who is a forensic anthropologist. And if you haven't had a chance, you might want to go back in the library and listen to Hillary, who is our forensic anthropologist, because that episode, I think, ties really well into today's episode with Julie, who, again, is an archaeologist, but they work kind of hand in hand. So
I'm picturing like Indiana Jones.
I feel like Indiana Jones, a little Jurassic Park. I kind of wish the Mummy was thrown in there too.
Yes.
Like a little hybrid of like all those things that we love.
Yes. Yes. Like that's what I just want. Like, yeah. Curious to see what that is. Because I'm thinking, like, does she find the Holy Grail, or is she finding bodies that are from, like, 15 BC?
Well, and how does that differ from what Hillary does? Because Hillary's bones. We know Hillary is bones, bones, bones. She studies the bones, knows the bones, uses the bones to get information. So is Julie the one finding the, like, gravesite or
burial ground?
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I don't know how Julie kind of ties into that initial timeline.
Like national treasure.
Oh, that would be great.
Right? Yeah. I wonder if it's because you know how we talk to like a documents person, and maybe she's all of that, like a documents and like objects plus bones and the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Or maybe.
Maybe it's totally wrong.
We're always totally wrong. Let's just get real. We're never right. So how about we stop trying to speculate and let's just get her on with us so that she can tell us what she does, and we don't have to confuse the listeners.
There you go. I like to speculate, though.
I know you do, but really I'm sure people are rolling their eyes at how wrong we usually are. So they're probably saying, True. Nikki, Mariah, could you just not tell us what you think it is? Because you're not right. So
Yeah.
It's fine. Let's fast forward. Let's get her.
Okay. All right. I'm excited.
Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Julie, it's Mariah.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good.
Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to speak with us. And we are excited to talk about forensic archaeology and what that is and how it's different from anthropology.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out.
So what is forensic archaeology?
Archaeology, period, is just the study of the human past and their cultures through whatever material remains may be left over. So typically you want to think of movie situations in which you see somebody's digging in the ground to uncover some type of history, whether that's like a building, a village, a burial, different things like that. That's just archaeology as a whole. And it's a subfield of anthropology, which is just a really broad field that just studies humankind.
Interesting. I love history and I love stuff like this. So I'm so excited.
Forensic archaeology work with forensic anthropology, or I guess how would you explain that they're different? Because like we did have a guest on who spoke about anthropology, and like we know that that's all bones, everything bones. They look at the bones, try to get all of the information that they can from that. So is there like a hard line that separates the two?
Yeah, that's honestly a really good question. I think that's something that a lot of people, even especially early on in the field, that they kind of struggle with. And forensic anthropology is when you examine not only the human skeleton, but essentially the human body. Now, a forensic anthropologist is going to examine human remains, whether they're skeletonized or whatever stage of decomposition the remains might be in, And essentially what they do is that they will specifically try to aid in the identification of that individual, maybe the events that occurred and the different postmortem or after death changes that may have happened to the remains. Forensic anthropologists can also help with the physical recovery of the remains. So they will also go out into the field and dig up human remains. But that specifically is more so what forensic archaeology is. It's not so much looking at the full analysis of the remains. You know, you're not coming up with a full biological assessment where you're coming up with their age, their sex, potentially ancestry, their stature, different things like that, where you're trying to ID them, but more so in just the physical recovery of the remains from their buried or environment.
So how did you get into this, Julie? Like, how did you know that this was even a job?
Yeah, I mean, it is forensic anthropology and archaeology, period, are not the typical every day-to-day job somebody has. And I mean, I have to say, honestly, I've always really loved history. Like, I remember, as corny as it sounds, as a kid playing in the playground in like elementary school, like I would dig in the sand under the slide and be like, oh, look, I found a shell. It was totally corny, but I definitely did that. And I actually went to college initially because I wanted to be an attorney. But I very quickly figured out that was not for me at all. And I had just taken an anthropology class, specifically cultural anthropology, which looks at the study of human cultural variation. So looking at, you know, different types of organizations, groups, economics, different tribes, and different things like that. And I just absolutely loved it. And I kept taking more anthropology classes, and I ended up making it a double major. And then I started to grow a little bit more into archaeology because I really do just love being outside. And within archaeology, you can definitely do that. Because that's what's so great about archaeology is that you are actually out there physically recovering and uncovering history. You're able to actually go out there, find the sites, find the cultures, find the materials, and that's how you're able to tell that story. And I really fell in love with that. But then I also took some human osteology classes, which is just a study of the human skeleton and anatomy. And I really fell in love with it. And I had stumbled upon forensic anthropology, which was a good in-between and marriage of those fields. So throughout my master's, that's how I was trained as a forensic anthropologist, but I still had an archaeology upbringing. So once I graduated, I actually went to work in the private sector outside of academia or government jobs. And I worked as an archaeologist, but also as a biological archaeologist, because within the field, that's kind of how it's termed, not so much forensic archaeology, but biological archaeology.
What is biological archaeology?
So the difference between biological archaeology and forensic archaeology or anthropology is that the forensic side is going to specifically look at human remains. That's what makes it forensic. Whereas a biological standpoint, you're more so broadening that range and you're looking at remains from a biological standpoint. So a lot of that involves looking at non-human remains, you know, looking at animal remains just as much, if not more so, than human remains.
Okay. Where do you come in the process of, someone calls you, would you work with like the anthropologist, or they come in and then you come in?
Yeah, so that is actually going to vary depending on your location. Within the United States, you have to establish medical legal significance whenever you encounter human remains. So especially in the state of Florida, whenever human remains are encountered or recovered, jurisdiction is automatically given to the medical examiner, in which they would then make a determination whether or not the remains are from a forensic or recent context, or if they're from an archaeological or historical context. And typically that comes down to a dividing line in the amount of years. So some states will say, oh, after 50 years, it's archaeological. After 75 years, it's archaeological. After 100, etc.
So you can tell when you come on, so if I don't know, let's just say you came on a burial ground or something, and you can tell eventually you're trying to figure out if those are 100 years old, 200 years old, Mayans or whoever, that sort of stuff.
Yes, exactly. So that was honestly a lot of what forensic anthropologists and archaeologists do, and even just plain archaeologists as well, that they work in tandem and in partnership with medical examiners or with state archaeologists to be able to help differentiate when remains are from which context. And if they are archaeological, then jurisdiction is then given to the state archaeologist. And usually the state archaeologist then partners with other professionals in their field. So that's typically like when I would come in and I would help to facilitate that and continue the analysis of the remains and see from then on what are the legal guidelines for that.
Oh, that's so fun.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Julie?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think you just answered it, but my brain is not processing it, so I just want to ask you again. So when they come across remains, the state, I guess we'll say the state determines that if it's over 100 years old, then it becomes archaeological. But that number can vary depending on like state laws.
Yeah, pretty much. So like a really good example and something that would happen to us all the time would be, let's say, for example, that somebody is just walking their dog in the park, and they let their dog go off the leash, and then all of a sudden the dog comes back and he's holding like an arm.
I really hope my dog never does that.
I mean, I gotta tell you, it happens more often than not. But it's those kinds of scenarios. So obviously, the owner is going to freak out. They're going to call the cops. And then the police or whatever law enforcement is around is going to come over and they're going to investigate, see if they can locate where the remains are from. And then that's when they get in contact with the medical examiner and they say, hey, I have some human remains or I have a body. And then that's when the medical examiner will take over. They'll look at the remains. And at that point, they could also have someone like me, like a forensic anthropologist or archaeologist, help to make that determination. So that way they can figure out, okay, is this forensic? Like, is this a recent suicide, casual death, just whatever? Or is this something of historical or cultural significance, in which that's when the archaeology side takes over.
Okay, so you are mostly working on historical stuff, not Jane Doe who went missing 2 weeks ago.
Yes, as a forensic archaeologist, that's what I do. But as a forensic anthropologist, you do a little bit of both.
Okay, perfect.
I love that. I saw this story, which was insane. And of course, I had to Google it. And I think it was somewhere in Russia or in a cold area where they found this sort of like a caveman. He was frozen, but he was pretty intact, like from thousands of years ago or something like that. And those are things that you would be looking into or you would be called on. I mean, there's not going to be like a frozen caveman in Florida, but but like those are the sort of things that you would be working on, is say they found a caveman or whatever, and then you come in and you figure out what year they're there, where they're from, that sort of stuff is what I'm getting, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, a really good example is, especially since I'm working in the private sector.
Okay.
So I work for cultural resource management firms, and basically all that means is it's just a fancy word for private archaeology, in which, depending on the state, but pretty much in almost every state within the United States and several countries even, whenever you want to build something, let's say you want to build a building or you want to add to your home, different things like that. In order to get the proper permitting, you have to have an environmental survey of the physical ground that you're going to build on to make sure that there isn't anything of historical or cultural significance. So we tend to get a lot of those jobs just to make sure that, if you're going to build a Starbucks, you're not building it over a Native American burial ground or an African American cemetery or a really important historical site from like the 60s or 70s, different things like that.
Oh, I love it. How do you research that? How is that not, or this is what blows my mind, and maybe you can explain this to me, but how is that not already documented?
You would be surprised. When you look at different regions and different areas, you also have to look at the cultural history of things. And, we are very fortunate that we're from the modern age. We document literally everything under the sun, whether or not that's, paperwork or your phone or your iPad or what have you. But when you think about things within a historical context, we didn't have technology back in the day. So a lot of it was passed down from like oral traditions, for example, in which it's just stories passed down from generation to generation. And eventually those tend to get lost over time, or they're just not as evenly dispersed to the greater culture. So, for example, like within the United States, we have our American culture, but there's also a very large Native American culture, and even African American culture. And especially now, when you're looking at a lot of the recent archaeological discoveries, especially in Florida, there's quite a few African American cemeteries that are coming up in which they weren't documented at all. And that was because there were segregation laws, even not only for people who are living, but also people who were dead, and in which, they weren't allowed to have fully established cemeteries, or if they were, they would have to be, very impoverished off to the side, on the side of the road, different things like that. Oh yeah, it happens all the time. And then because there weren't these laws to help protect these cultural sites or these remains, that people over the years have just developed on top of or directly through it, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So a lot of it...
That is insane to me.
Yeah, like there was, I forget which specifically it was, but I mean, even just for my thesis research, I had examined an abandoned and forgotten African American cemetery in Florida, in which the only reason we discovered it was, and there's no documentation about it whatsoever, except for one document because of a tombstone of an individual from the military that was interred there. But if we wouldn't have had that document, no one would have ever known about the remains unless they physically dug in the ground.
And there's no markers, there's no gravestones, there's no nothing.
No, I mean, you have to think about it. Even today, if anybody has been unfortunate enough to have to go and purchase those items, they are quite expensive.
Yeah.
And that's even in today's economy. So when you think about back then, having the resources and the financial resource to be able to actually purchase those items is very difficult.
That is so crazy to me, because you would think that, when you hear the word cemetery, I think a fence, a gravestone, all of that. Yeah, I never would have thought that. That's wild to me. Wow.
Yeah, it definitely happens. And even there are scenarios in which, there are those cemeteries where you have those tombstones, you have those grave markers and different things like that. But because they turn into disarray, meaning that they aren't actually taken care of, the earth is going to take over eventually. So plants are going to grow over it. It's actually going to go into the stones and the grave markers and just break them apart. We essentially term that bioturbation, in which just the actual environment is going to disturb and change or alter different aspects, whether or not that's human remains or a stone or a coffin and different things like that. So, within a couple years, something that was fully standing and you could perfectly see it during the day now is going to be completely desolate, and you would never ever know that there was something there.
Are you seeing, and this might be a really stupid question, so say you've got a spot and you found let's just say a battleground. Are you seeing clothes and weapons? Are those at that point, because it's been so long, the earth has taken over those as well?
It depends. It truly depends. And that actually is more specifically related to taphonomy. And like I was mentioning earlier, that bioturbation, in which you're examining the buried environment. And that's not just for human remains. It could be for artifacts, for ecofacts, different things like that. And that's when, you're looking at the specificities of the soil, specifically if it's a buried environment, but it can also be outside of it. So like for that example, if it was a burial ground, it depends. If you're in really acidic soils, even for a normal person, when you hear the word acidic, that tends, not to be a good word.
Yeah.
So you would think, okay, that's probably going to affect the cultural material that you're encountering. And aside from not only that, it also depends on the physical materials that that cultural material is made from. So it, for example, if you have like a wood artifact, depending on the environment, that wood may not preserve as well as like metal, for example, or clay. And even then, it really just depends on the artifact itself and what it's comprised of, as well as the buried environment or the contextual environment it's found.
How do you figure out how old that bone is?
Yeah, so there are actually quite different ways and varied ways in which you're able to make that determination. And it really just depends on whatever resources are available to you. Most people are typically going to hear about or know about radiocarbon dating. And that basically what you do is that you're doing a chemical analysis on the remains in which you're able to observe how much carbon the remains have released. And that's going to give you a general age range. It's usually pretty good, but it can also be very expensive. And there are only certain labs that can do that. So that resource may not be readily available to you either.
Okay.
But there are other things that you can do as well. So especially when you're looking at human remains, one of the best things that you can find are artifacts, looking at different contextual clues. You know, whether or not, let's say you found some remains and you're able to find some, you know, the burial outline, whether or not they are buried in a certain shape. Okay. As, for example, let's say like the wood would degrade. You're able to see if it's a coffin versus another type of burial material. And that usually is able to give you a good inclination as to the time period. You can also look at...
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like, when did wood coffins start? Was that like in the 1800s during the Western time?
Oh, definitely. It definitely existed during that time, but there were very different variations depending on where you were from. So within what region... It could also vary depending on your cultural practice. So, for example, when you think of, you know, how would the Amish bury somebody as opposed to us in the, not to say just the greater culture, you know, we would have different trends. You know, at some point we transitioned from wood coffins and caskets to lead coffin and caskets, in which they're made out of metal and different things like that.
The metal ones, does that break down in the soil?
It does and it doesn't. Unfortunately, it more so affects the remains themselves.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And honestly, it is a very interesting experience whenever you run into a lead coffin. And as gross as it sounds, you tend to find people soup, even if it's hundreds of years old.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy.
Definitely.
Wow. And then can you see, obviously, if it's a boy or a girl, a child of whatever, so you would get more information from that, I would gather, right?
Oh, definitely. And sometimes you can even gather those clues if you don't have the physical remains. So cemeteries, for example, are a really good context for that because they're so rich in artifacts for the most part. So, for example, let's say that you find a few remains, but they're so brittle, they're so broken down, they've been so disturbed that it's really hard for you to truly make a good determination as to if you have like juveniles or adults, if you have younger people, elderly people, more males, more females. You can look at the different type of grave goods or the coffin hardware especially, and you can look at those trends throughout that region or that culture. Like in Florida and a lot of the southeastern U.S., typically within like the 1900s, the 1800s, you would mark a child burial with a lamb effigy. So let's say within that context, you find, you don't really have good skeletal analysis available to you, but you have, let's say, 4 lambs and then 2 like angels or whatever. Then you're able to help determine, okay, I know I at least have 4 juveniles somewhere in here.
That's crazy.
You can learn about the history of it, and there are different type of animals that are used or different type of effigies and symbols and things. But a lamb specifically is used just because it's taken typically back to Christian mythology and Christian Catholic culture.
Your job's fun. I love history, so I'm all into it. I think this is awesome. I mean, you have to kind of study different, almost, you have to kind of know everything, or I would think if you find something and then you just kind of snowballs and you got to research a lot of stuff, time frames and years and years and years and years ago stuff.
Definitely. But that's honestly one of the exciting aspects.
Totally.
In a way, you're kind of like a forever student. You're always learning. You're always uncovering new histories, new cultures.
Yeah.
Little tidbits. It kind of turns into like a scavenger hunt. But that also is a really big aspect of what is actually required legally whenever you do these type of excavations or digs or recoveries. You have to have some type of background research of the physical land as well as the general culture and how it pertains to the time period. So you're able to kind of have a snapshot of what is the context for whatever it is that you're dealing with.
I love it. Do you ever have bodies that you've found and maybe a box that's stored with little trinkets that maybe someone has buried with the person, or that doesn't usually happen?
No, I would say that tends to happen sometimes. There's this idea of grave goods or burial goods, and you see that all throughout history. You see that from thousands of years ago to today. And it's just this idea of, you're leaving someone and they're leaving you, and you want to have things, whether it's for yourself or for them, that helps them feel more comfortable, helps you feel more comfortable, and helps to represent them as who they were.
I get that because we do that I do that with people that have passed. I always like to have them to have something that they liked. Like my grandpa loved to smoke his cigarettes and have a Coors Light. So we put that in his little... he got cremated, but we put it in his little, I don't even know what it's called, the little mausoleum thing that you put him in.
Yes.
So I would assume that maybe years and years later, somebody's going to be like, why has this guy got cigarettes and a Bud Light? If it ever, if it ever gets stumbled across. But yeah, I get that. I get it.
Yeah, it's something that is soothing for the individual, but it can also be a cultural practice too. I mean, like when you look at really historical burials, like from Vikings or warriors or Greek, Roman, Mayan, what have you, they're going to have different types of cultural artifacts and ecofacts that would typically accompany a burial.
Yeah. Oh, have you ever stumbled across stuff like that? Like anything really, really, really old?
I have. I've actually been very fortunate, and I've had quite a lot of different archaeological experiences and anthropological ones as well. And I actually got my upbringing in archaeology I studied in the United States, but my mom, so I'm first generation American. My mom is from El Salvador and my dad is Vietnamese.
Okay.
And we would go to El Salvador almost every single year. It was just something that, was really nice, being able to be a part of that culture, seeing where, she's from, seeing where the family's from, being close to that family and whatnot. And there are several Mayan sites. So El Salvador is actually the smallest country in Central America. And it is one of the most furthest south extensions of Mayan cultural evidence. So over there, you're able to see so much history. And I was really fortunate to be able to be a part of one of those sites, and be able to actually be a part of that was one of the best experiences of my life.
That's so awesome. Were you ever into like dinosaurs, or that's just a totally different thing that archaeologists, I know there's obviously the dinosaur archaeologist and all that type of stuff. Did you ever want to go that path, or you always wanted to go this path?
I mean, I can definitely tell you, even today, I love dinosaurs, especially dinosaur skeletons. I mean, come on. But I have to say, I knew that I always loved people and their cultures more than like animals or dinosaurs. And even so, within archaeology or anthropology as a whole, there are those subfields too. So like I am a forensic archaeologist, anthropologist, or a biological anthropologist, archaeologist. Whereas, there are zoo archaeologists, for example, in which they specifically examine only animal remains. That's their whole gambit.
Okay.
But then you could also be like a paleontologist, in which that's more so in the realm of looking at dinosaurs.
I would like the people aspect of it too. The dinosaurs would be cool as like a little side bonus, but yeah, I would the people and the history of the land and people, and I love anything history, whether it's dinosaurs or 10 minutes ago. I think it's fun. I don't know.
No, I totally agree. I mean, if I ever find a dinosaur, I'd be so excited.
Right? I swear, I just saw this thing where the lakes are drying up, because there's drought places and whatever. And they found dinosaur tracks. I literally watched this 30-minute thing about dinosaur tracks this morning that they found in this lake bed that's dried up. And it was so fascinating to me. It's just the tracks, it's not bones. But I'm thinking, how has that even stayed preserved like that for all of these thousands and thousands of years underwater, and you can see the little claw marks. It's cool. I love it. I love stuff like that. It's fascinating.
Oh, yeah, no, it's funny because I've actually been following that too. I had a couple of family and friends that were like, oh my God, well, do you know anything about this? And yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. And I think especially because of the line of work that I'm in and the experiences that I've had, that it really does show that life has a way of preserving no matter what. And as much as, it can be degraded or it can be altered and changed, there's still a marker. And I think that's one of the best parts also of looking at a human skeleton, for example. A lot of people think, oh, you're looking at bones. What the heck can you tell from bones? But skeletons and osseous material and bones, they carry markers of the different life ways that whatever organism, especially humans, have lived. And that is really beautiful to me.
Can you pull out, I know this might be a really dumb question, but is there blood in bones still that old, or no, they're dried up?
Well, again, it depends. It really just depends on the context in which it's in, how old it is, the burial environment, whether or not it's been treated by different things. So I always remember being fortunate enough to work with the medical examiner on some forensic cases in which they had found some remains that had some pigmentation on them, but they're fully skeletonized. We were able to do analysis and we were able to show that it was actually still blood that was on the remains, which was surprising because it's fully down to bone. There's absolutely nothing else. And we were able to determine that it was actually used ritualistically afterwards.
Really? Because I was thinking how in Jurassic Park they take the mosquito, and I'm always like, I wonder if they could take the blood and turn it into a dinosaur. And I was thinking maybe there's a remnants of blood, and can you put that in say Ancestry database, and then you can maybe locate an ancestor, or that would never work?
Well, it can and it can't. Not necessarily with blood, but looking at the more molecular structure under that. So, for example, looking at DNA and genomes and stuff. And, everybody is so familiar with Ancestry and Me,
Yeah.
23andMe, different things like that.
Yeah.
And that's really where a lot of that started. It had started in archaeological study, in which we were specifically typically looking at human variation. So looking at the human past, trying to figure out how are we all interrelated? How is it that humans have spread across the entire world and we're so different, but we're still the same species? And trying to determine, where did we start? How did we start? How are we related? And how does that relate to, human evolution? How are we all related to each other on a biological and genetic level? And a lot of that started, when you think about human evolution, you're not going to find, some pretty little all put together, full flesh and bone. You're really lucky if you find, for example, just a tooth or even a fragment of a tooth. So those situations, all you have is that osseous material. And if you're fortunate enough, then you have just the right amount or just the right context in which some of that is preserved, and you're able to do that analysis to see. Because, I know on Ancestry and Me or something, one of those, you're able to see what percentage Neanderthal you are, and that's how you're able to do that.
Yeah. I love I do Ancestry. just because I thought I would be like related to the queen or something. But me and my aunt do it. I love it. And it's just so fascinating.
Julie, I was wondering, could you walk us through like a project or a case that you've worked on that just kind of helps us better understand like what you do on a day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. So typically, let's say my normal day-to-day job, because I'm specifically in an archaeological firm, typically what would happen is, let's say that somebody is going to build a condo in a downtown busy area, and there were no previous surveys because the last time that it's an empty parking lot, and it's been that way for like the past 30 years. Nobody's built on top of it since then or before that. There's really not much history to it. And then a developer is coming in and, hey, I want to build a condo. All right, so now we have to take apart that parking lot and that foundation so that we can actually investigate the physical ground that condo is going to be built on. And we can do our cultural resource survey in order to see whether or not there is something of cultural or historical significance. So we would start digging. At first, within archaeological survey and excavation, there are 3 different phases. There's a phase 1, phase 2, and 3. And basically, they're just different ways in which, depending on what you find, it's going to activate different parts of that process. So you would start out just doing, a couple little digs throughout the area, and let's say, oh wow, we found something, it's really cool. Oh, we keep finding more and more. Okay, this is now turned from a small project into a large one. You're now going to activate another phase of excavation. And then, all right, let's broaden our dig a little bit more. We're going to dig bigger units. We're going to be more meticulous and try to really break down the context. Okay, what is it that we have here? And let's say we find it's really big. We're finding these really awesome artifacts. This is definitely something. Then you're going to go into the next phase, in which is going to be the most detailed work that you're going to do. That's when you're really going to try to find as much as you can, and you're going to try to determine the significance and what is that specific site that you're on. And let's say within that process, you end up finding human remains. That would then go through an entire other process in which you would contact the proper authorities, different legal guidelines would be enacted, but essentially, let's say everybody says, all right, it's A-okay, continue on, but at that point, you have to have someone like me who would help to oversee that the remains are being properly handled, properly recovered, and that they can be analyzed afterwards so you can understand, again, what is the context, why are there remains here, and different things like that. So then that's what I would do. Then we would wrap that up, and we would go into the report process, turn that in, and then see what happens from there.
And then I'm assuming, like, when you guys do stumble across like remains that have been found, do you guys ever relocate everything and then allow the condo building to be built there? Or is it like a hard and fast rule that like once human remains are found, it becomes kind of like a protected area?
It is not. It definitely varies. And that's where the cultural consultation, and we deem it as mitigation, that's where that occurs, in which you're able to get every party that's involved. So typically at that point, you're going to have a state entity, you're going to have the archaeological firm, you're going to have the condo representatives, you're going to have all the interested parties there in order to determine what is the best way to remediate the situation in which all parties are able to get what they need. And, let's say you only find like 1 or 2 burials, and they're not anything super significant. Not saying that burials aren't, insignificant, but, it's not like a Native American burial ground or something like that. Typically, whenever you run into that, that's when an entirely different set of legal guidelines are then followed. And typically, whenever that happens, you are not building. You have just lost that. You got to relocate. But I mean, we've run into that a lot, honestly, with a lot of pipeline work, in which, we'll say, oh, we found so many sites that are along the specific corridor that you want to build a pipeline on. And then we let them know, like, okay, all right, let's just leave that in place. We don't want to disturb it. We want to protect it. Let's go around it. And they try to reroute it so that way they're still able to build their pipeline and we are still able to do our due diligence and protect the cultural resource.
How long is that process? Weeks, months?
Oh, it can take a long time. It really just depends on, what is the project, how long the project is going, how much you found, it can vary. It could take a couple weeks, it could take a couple years. It just depends.
So every spot of land that is sold anywhere, like you want to buy a house, you bought a house that has land, like everything has been surveyed. Like I'm not going to go buy a house in wine country that has 3 acres and then half of it's like a burial ground that I don't know about because that's already been taken care of. Or can things just be overlooked and you could be on a burial ground and you don't know it?
You could be. And that honestly has a lot to do with the way that the legal protections, legal guidelines have been enacted and also how they're reinforced. But it can also be just depending on, let's say that another firm had done the cultural survey a couple years ago, and those typically last, depending on what state you are, it's going to last anywhere from like 2 to 8 years. So let's say that was like the 5-year mark, you're covered, you're A-okay, you should be able to buy that property, you're going to go build a barn or something, and all of a sudden, oops, I found something. But there was a cultural survey, what the heck? I thought I was safe, I thought I was covered. But depending on how that survey is done, we have certain guidelines and how that needs to be done, but depending on how that was actually performed, it might not have been in the best, let's say, spatial spread. So, you didn't cover every single part, and just that one tiny little part that you're going to go build on, that's the one where it's at. So there's a lot of little intricacies that can play into it.
I always just picture like Pet Cemetery where you just don't want to build on certain places because then now you're haunted and you got a lot of crazy things.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. Like I deal with human remains all the time. That's my specialty. But I do not want to live near a cemetery or on top of one. No, thank you. That's bad juju.
Yeah. That would stress me out. I couldn't do it. And then I would be like part of your job when you're explaining that you come across these, burials and I would think, oh my God, what if I disturbed one of them? And now, because my husband and I went to years and years ago, went to the catacombs in Paris, and
oh yeah,
I loved it. It was so cool. But I was afraid of, like, when we were leaving, they check everyone's bags and there's a pile of bones. And I asked the guy, I'm like, what's up with that? And he said that people steal bones and they try to take them home. I'm like, there's no way in hell I am taking someone with me back to United States and they're going to haunt me for the rest of their life and disturb whatever that is. I was even freaking out with the bone dust that they have kind of like everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, it's on my shoe and they're going to come back with me.
Oh, you're so cute. But no, I totally get that 100%. But honestly, it's really interesting because you tend to run into scenarios like that all the time. Unfortunately, there is a really big black market for human remains, and there's a long history in that. For example, I've run into some anatomical specimens in which that's basically just a fancy way of saying, an articulated skeleton that is, propped up, that you can see the full anatomy and whatnot. And that's typically used in like, medical schools and different things like that. But a lot of those situations, for example, those were a lot of just grave robberies in which they specifically stole remains from impoverished areas or, from...
That's crazy.
A really unfortunate situations like in Asia, and different things like that, where there's just so many people, but there's not a lot of space and you can intern them. But then there's also the flip side of that too, where, you can run into like trophy skulls, for example, particularly from like the World Wars, the Cold War, different things like that, in which it was a sense of pride to be able to have your enemy's remains.
That is wild.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it. I could not have, Bill sitting next to me forever in my house. I couldn't do it.
Oh yeah, you don't want Bob on your mantle every night.
No, I really don't. I really don't. That's crazy.
No, I hear you. I could never. But it happens. It does.
Yeah, I thought that was bizarre when I saw that at the catacombs. I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking like, why? Why? Who does that? That's crazy. That's weird. There's a black market for it.
Oh, very much so.
And nowadays, though, I would think that's weird to me anyways, where you can just get a plastic skull like at Party City, like anytime at Halloween, a full skull's coming or a skeleton's coming out. Just wait, get a plastic one. You don't need the real deal. That's weird.
See, you would think, but I think especially with the fact that it is, it's bone, was at some point a living entity, but also the fact that it's human, there's this really interesting cultural experience and dichotomy of this, fascination with death and with the other and different things like that. So I feel like that definitely plays into, I don't want to say like the darker side or the more macabre side, but it is something, I can definitely attest to that. When I was going in school and stuff, I was definitely interested in human remains specifically, but that is something that can be challenging, in which you have to still make sure that you are being respectful of the individual. And honestly, that sometimes I run into that at work. We are professionals, and that we, within the field, we do this for a purpose. We do this so that we can help to protect these individuals, help to identify these individuals and put them to rest, and give opportunity for their descendants or descendant communities to be able to properly mourn them and acknowledge them.
That's great.
But sometimes there's just this fascination of, this is, I'm going to be able to do this, and this analysis. And you get really excited, and it's like, well, take a step back. Remember, this is still a person. This is still an individual.
Yeah, I can see that. That would be hard to, but these other communities, and you are honoring this person, whether they were like 500 years ago or whatever. That's cool that they finally, it's not like they're forgotten.
Exactly. Nobody wants to be forgotten. It doesn't matter if, you're just a lonely farmer or you're the leader of some municipality,
Seriously. Have you uncovered anything that's like shocked you, or is everything pretty much just the same?
I would have to say there are definitely some things that still surprise me, but I can also tell you that like my gross level is much more different than most people. It's more so like, as crazy as it sounds, like I have seen a lot, and the human body is absolutely disgusting. I wouldn't say that a lot of things shock me anymore, but it's more of like, oh, that's kind of neat.
Oh, okay. Where I would probably think it's gross. Like I would be freaking out. I have a problem with smells and textures, and Mariah can't handle bugs and anything crawly.
Oh, yeah.
No. There's bugs. Count me out.
Oh,
yeah. Mariah's not a bug person.
Oh, man. You would hate like cheese skippers and stuff and like maggots and whatnot that we run into all the time.
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Nope.
I've definitely seen a lot over, my career and over my schooling, and I've been very fortunate that I've been exposed to a lot of that. But I've also been told, training like CSI or different types of law enforcement, being like, wow, you guys are hardcore.
I guess my question, Julie, is like, doing your job, how has that had an effect on like how you view your own mortality?
Yeah, I honestly really do love talking about that. I think, again, with this fascination of death and the other and the afterlife and whatnot, that especially within the United States, the culture and the relationship that we have with death is one that is so disconnected. We are taught to be afraid of death, and that's even perforated to the way that we organize the spaces for death. Typically cemeteries are tucked away. They're in a certain part of town. They're not it's changed. Whereas if you look at like the history of cemeteries and, in like the 18th, 17th centuries, they were actually these areas where people would hang out. You just go hang out in the cemetery. You go have picnic on the lawn and different things like that. And it was a very different relationship with death. And then you can look at other types of cultures in which, they have a very close relationship with death, especially of their ancestors, and how they truly try to venerate them. And there are some cultures where they will mummify their dead, and there's a certain cultural event where they're just going to bring them out, and they sit them in the house just like everybody. They have dinner with them, they dance with them, and everything. It's really interesting seeing the different types of relationships that people and cultures have with death. And for me personally, it's really opened my eyes in the way that I view death. When I was younger, I was pretty much like everybody else. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to die one day. You'd think of all like the worst case scenarios of how you're going to die, or, you want to make sure that you live your life to the fullest and different things like that. And I think now, over the course of doing the work that I do, being passionate about it, that it's more so that I view death as a friend. It is the true guarantee of life, and not that means less or that it's this big scary thing, but that when that day comes, it's going to come. And I just hope that I've lived a good life, and I can say that it has made me more passionate about doing the things that I love and truly pursuing my passions, as opposed to just living every day to day, because no day is guaranteed.
I love that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a great way to end your segment. I think, Nikki, let's do some of our fun questions. Okay, so this part, Julie, is just like silly, random questions that kind of help us like get to know who you are.
Yeah.
So one of the ones that I always like to ask is, what is your favorite snack?
Ooh, let's see. Now that's hard because I'm a total foodie. I absolutely love food. I get very hangry, and everybody knows me that I have snacks everywhere. I just have to take snack breaks. I would say, I'd say like my favorite candy is Sour Patch Kids because they're amazing.
That's a good one.
But probably my favorite snack would probably be like popcorn. Like I really love popcorn.
I love popcorn too.
Okay.
Well, that goes into my question for you is, what would your last meal be?
Ooh.
Since you love food.
Honestly, my last meal, if I could have anything in the world, it would be my family's like Thanksgiving meal.
Okay. Love that.
So typically what we do is that we do a Salvadorian tradition of making like turkey sandwiches, but you like make the turkey just like you would for, like an American tradition, but obviously very different spices and different things like that. But the recipe that we use is, passed down from like generation to generation, and my grandma has always made it, and a couple of us have tried over the years, but that is definitely, whenever I think of home, that is the meal that I think of.
That's cool. That's a good one. You have anything to drink? Any desserts?
Oh, desserts would definitely be a chocolate cake.
Oh, yeah. Has to be.
You can never go wrong with chocolate cake.
Exactly. Mariah, you have one?
I do. Is there a sound that you associate with your job?
Ooh, that is a really interesting one. Huh. Oh. I can say that one that I associate is so typically with my job, I tend to dig holes. I am outside in the heat or whatever context I'm in, whether or not I'm going through a bunch of briars and prickly vines or a nice open field with cows. But typically I just have a shovel with me and my pack. And I just think if there was a sound, it would have to be whenever a metal shovel hits like a rock. That is like a sound that it irks you, and you know it no matter what.
And as you're saying it, I just heard it in my head. All right. What is one of your hobbies?
I'm a very adventurous person, but the first thing that came to mind It's definitely very, I think, Florida of me. I have a swimmable mermaid tail, like a legit one, and I'm actually a certified freediving mermaid, and I
What?
love to take it out.
Wait. How do you get certified as a free diving mermaid? What do you have to do?
So you can totally look it up. I think it's through Patty, but there are other organizations that do it too. So you can do it with your scuba diving and different things like that. I'm also a scientific diver, so I have like all of that stuff, but I mostly do it for fun. But I
What?
love,
Okay.
but like I love the water. I mean, you guys can't see me, but I actually have like bright purple hair.
Oh my, I'm picturing you
So
like Ariel, like when like in her little cavern. Now that you said, I'm picturing like how her little trinkets that she finds in the
oh,
ocean.
definitely. 100%.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It's definitely different, but I absolutely love it. 10 out of 10 recommend.
Oh, what do you look for like in the ocean?
Oh, well, I love collecting shells. I
Okay.
definitely, wherever I go, I love to collect shells. I also really love fossiling and like
Oh,
looking
love.
for those type of things. And typically, like you're free diving or you have just like a tiny little air kit with you and you're just looking for old remains or bones of like shark teeth and like
Oh, if you find a megalodon tooth, you have to take, yes, die. That is, I would die to find a megalodon tooth for real.
oh yeah, no, I have one that's like the size of my hand. It's broken, but
What?
it is yeah, it is the one I am most proud of and I am never getting rid of it.
Yes. Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, you just get more fascinating the more we talk.
Aw, thanks.
Okay, I think I'm going to say, what would you be embarrassed to admit that you hoard?
Ooh, that I hoard. Oh. So it's not like super embarrassing, but
Megalodon
I don't
teeth?
know. No, I wouldn't say I hoard those, but I mean, so I'm kind of weird. I really love like organization
Mm.
and like office supplies and stuff. And I have a notebook problem. Like I love shopping for notebooks that are like super cute or pretty, and I have way too many that I'm never going to use, but I have to have them.
That's funny. We've never heard that one yet.
Hey, that's okay. Nikki and I respect that. We're old school. We like pen and
Yeah.
paper. We appreciate a
Yeah.
good notebook.
I love a good notebook.
Oh yeah.
I actually have kind of a lot of like the spiral ones that I'll get my kids for school. And I'm looking around in my office right now, and yeah, I have a lot too that I don't think I like write in one or two of like I'll do like the first couple pages and then I move on to the next spiral. I never maintain the same one.
Oh my gosh, I do the exact same thing. Like I have notebooks like for work. I have
Yeah.
ones that are just like in my office, but I've never touched. I have some at home that I've never touched either.
Yeah.
And like I think I told you, Mariah, but I'm actually moving to Hawaii and now I'm like so torn
Yes.
because I'm like, okay, do I bring some notebooks or do I not bring notebooks?
Oh, you bring the notebook. You pack the notebook.
You bring the notebooks. I mean, if there's just a couple that you just think are just dumb and you don't need them, but at least bring your favorites. Narrow it down. Like the Marie Kondo, where, you got to see which ones spark joy.
Yeah, definitely.
And maybe bring the ones that spark joy, but I say bring the notebooks.
I'll try. Hopefully not too many.
Oh, Julie, you were wonderful. And this was so fun and helpful in distinguishing the two fields and how they work together. I appreciate you taking the time and spending some time with us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I loved it. It was fun.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. This was honestly really great, and I look forward to seeing what else you guys come up with. And, if anybody ever has any questions, you can always shoot.
Awesome. Okay. So, what'd you think?
Love the history.
I knew you would. I knew you were over there geeking out.
Yes.
I knew it.
Like dying. Loved it. But I love history.
I think she is the most energetic, fascinating hybrid of a person, right? Like you have this Indiana Jones character who is swimming like a mermaid part-time.
Every time she said,
I mean, with purple hair. Like you said, she just got better and better. Like you just keep adding another layer of like, I just love her. Keep talking,
I love
Julie.
I just like the history of it. And it was a lot like the anthropology, but I think what maybe separates it is I don't even know what the word is, but like the history part of it. You know what I mean? That's where the archaeology part comes in.
Yeah, the historical implication.
There you go. That'd be cool if you find a dinosaur bone. I just loved all of it. I really did.
I mean, very interesting. And she's a very interesting person.
Totally. The mermaid tail threw me for a loop.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
But I dig it.
Totally. Into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was great. I think she really helped define the difference, like you said. And I think I could see her and Hillary working together and doing some cool stuff. They should sync up.
And they're both fun people. So
they're the best people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'd be fast friends.
Right? Yeah.
100%.
They really should be.
Mm-hmm. It was good.
They'd have a lot to talk about.
Okay, well, next week it is then.
All right, next week it is.
We'll see if we can find someone just as cool as a mermaid swimming archaeologist, which really, when you put it that way, makes her way cooler than Indiana Jones. So
right? And I'm telling you, I
saying.
would die to find a megalodon tooth. Die.
And she has one.
Yeah.
Again, there's another layer.
Yeah. I was into her. I loved it.
It was super. We'll see if we can make next week just as interesting.
Exactly. All right.
I'll talk to you next week then. Well, probably before that. But, for all you listeners, it'll be next week.
Exactly. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We do encourage you to follow us at Instagram at Body to Burial. Hit us up on Twitter at Body to Burial. And you guessed it, you can send us an email to hello@bodytoburial.com.
If you have any guest suggestions, just let us know. Please hit the subscribe button or follow button on whatever app you are listening to.
Thanks so much, guys. See you next time.